So James, you'll have 100 then,
Okay, thanks.
as opposed to your 100 that you already have.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry, I can't give you a grade above 100.
I can't take a grade below 100 either.
Yeah, okay. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about this, and guys, remind me that I'll go back and fix those grades.
My grade was probably the same because I got the.
No, I know you got the other one right. So
Yeah, I got the synapse one correct, but I got the grooves. I take John Ryan instead of
I won't take points away from you. So I screwed that up. My bad. All right, let's rock and roll. So starting up with the muscular system, and like I said, I'm gonna just kind of go through like I did on nerves. A lot of folks, just letting you know that you need to really watch these videos and stuff. When I don't have everybody with me, and so looking through these notes is not enough. You got to stick with me. You got to hear what I really emphasize in class, because what I emphasize in class is going to be what you see on the test. If you go back and look at those test questions and you watch my videos, you'll see the things that I really talked about are things that I put test questions up for. Same thing with this test. I wrote the test, I wrote the notes, and I'm talking to you. So if you hear me say it and you see it on the notes, that might be something important. If you see me fly by it and not really make a big deal out of it, probably not gonna have a test question on it. So really focus on that stuff. Like I said, we had a couple real good grades, a couple B's, a couple C's, a couple folks that need to do better. So keep that in mind, and we'll knock it out and do better on the next set. So let's carry on. Muscular system. Gonna roll through some stuff today and hit some types of skeletal muscle. I have some pictures that kind of show you some different types of skeletal muscle or types of muscle on these notes. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So muscles are cells that provide movement. We'll talk about what muscles do in just a second, but your big three types of muscle cells are skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Skeletal muscle is named skeletal muscle because it's usually attached to a bone. And so we're talking about macroscopic movement. We're talking about conscious control, muscles that you have to think about moving them. Skeletal muscle. They are striated. You'll see what that means in just a second, but the simple way to know what it means is that they have stripes. They are voluntary because you have to do them, and they're long, skinny cells that when you tell that cell to do something, the whole cell gets shorter. One of the big overarching themes of muscular system is that muscles can only pull. Okay, muscles cannot push. Muscles can only get shorter. Muscles can only pull. So whether you're talking about any type of muscle, that really the only thing a muscle cell can do is get smaller. A skeletal muscle is just going to go from long to short. A smooth muscle, however, is a little bit more oval shaped. It's going to be not striated, involuntary, and the whole cell gets smaller. So what the smooth muscle usually is going to be something like digestive system, things you're not thinking about, and it just takes the tube, which is your gut, and just kind of twists and squeezes it, which is your digestive muscle movement. And then you have the one special type of muscle in your body is cardiac muscle. It looks like it looks like skeletal muscle, but obviously it's involuntary like smooth muscle. So why would you want to have cardiac muscle be the only muscle that's different anywhere in your body?
Because you use your heart more than most of the muscles.
Okay, because you use your heart more. I dig that. But why would it need to be striated? Okay, let me rephrase. So that's a good answer to the question of why does it need to be different. So the next question is, why does it need to look like both of the other things?
Because it needs to shorten but expand again involuntarily.
Okay, yeah, you're kind of bouncing around it, but I think what you're saying. You need to have the shortened part, the way it moves like skeletal muscle, and then you need to have the involuntary like smooth muscle. Specifically, you don't really care how much Smooth muscle contracts. You know, when you need to move something through your esophagus or through your stomach, whether it moves an inch and a half or an inch and 3/8 doesn't really matter. When your heart is beating, one of the most important things you need to keep you alive is consistency. You need your heart to be a metronome. Every single beat needs to be the same, and the distance of time between each beat needs to be around the same. One of the most common, like you can look at causes of death. You know, it's in the news a lot now, causes of death, COVID and everything else like that. But literally what is the final thing that makes you die is nearly a huge, I don't have the percentage, but it's a big chunk arrhythmia. Your heart not beating correctly. Whether it's an infection that kills you or an accident or trauma, anything like that, the arrhythmia, the heart not beating like it should, is usually that final nail, literally nail in the coffin. Okay? So that's why cardiac muscle has to be a little bit different, and that's all we're going to say about cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle looks like skeletal muscle and acts like smooth muscle. And I'm going to talk a lot about skeletal muscle, a little bit about smooth muscle, but no more about cardiac muscle, right? So what can muscle do for us? The easiest one is actually the second one I have down here. It moves. It produces movement. It either moves things throughout your body or it moves your skeleton around. Skeletal muscle produces movement. It also generates heat. You know, if you take my little stinking chihuahua and you put him outside on a cold day to use the bathroom, what's it going to do? If I take the little stinking dog chihuahua that I don't like, throw him outside on a cold day and tell him to go use the bathroom, he's going to go use the bathroom, but what is his body going to do? It's going to shake, it's going to shiver. Because what is a muscle doing for you? Muscle warms you up. Muscles generate heat. And so that's the reason we shake. That's the reason we shiver. It's our muscle trying to generate more heat to keep us warm. But even when you're not cold, muscles provide a lot of your homeostatic heat balance. Muscles keep us at 98.6. They can stabilize and protect the joints. You know, muscles are wrapped around all of our joints. Probably the one we know the most is the rotator cuff, the group of muscles surrounding your shoulder. And, you know, that is going to be really important for keeping those joints where they belong, having those muscles wrapped around there, stabilized. And even when you think you're doing nothing, even when you get really, really comfortable, even when you're standing, you feel like you're standing perfectly still, your muscles are constantly working to maintain your posture, to keep you upright, to keep your neck upright, to help maintain your position. This is not a passive thing. Muscles are working their butts off to keep you upright and fighting against gravity. Another thing about producing movement, leg muscles kind of act like a second heart. You know, we're tall and bipedal, which means that our heart is really good at delivering blood to our body, especially our feet and our legs, because gravity helps. But getting the blood back from our toes and our legs up to our heart, that pressure from the heart doesn't do enough work. And so what you need every time you take a step, your leg muscles are squeezing around your veins and kind of squeezing and squishing the blood back up, the venous blood back up to your heart. This is why when you get somebody on bed rest that's not moving their legs, a lot of times they'll get those big blow up things that pump up and release, because it's providing that extra second heart, if you will, down in the legs, helping blood get back to the body. Okay? Prevents edema too, which is just pooling of blood and pooling of water. So how can muscle do these things? The functional characteristics of muscle. First thing, you got to be able to signal excitability. These are cells that can receive stimuli. Tomorrow, when we talk through the steps of how muscles move, the first thing that has to happen is a nerve signal reaches the muscle. Now, yesterday we took the test and we talked about the question I screwed up there, the synapse. where one nerve, the terminal point of one nerve, reaches the dendrite of the next nerve. Now, what that means is a muscle has to have something on it that kind of acts like a dendrite, because you're still going to have the end of a nerve and you're still going to release neurotransmitters, but instead of hitting a new nerve, now I'm going to hit the muscle. And so a muscle has to be able to accept a electronic signal, a chemical signal from the nervous system. Easy enough. I didn't even put a definition for contractility, because the muscle has to be able to get smaller. That's what a muscle does, gets smaller. You have to be able to contract it. Then the muscle has to be able to be passive. If you think about your triceps and your biceps, biceps, triceps, calm down, okay? So you have your biceps and your triceps. When I use my biceps, I'm going to passively use my triceps, and they're allowed to be stretched. Then when I use my triceps, the biceps become passive and allow themselves to be stretched. So you have to have that extensibility, okay? And the last thing is one of the most misunderstood words that people use, because we use it so wrong so often. Elasticity. Elasticity does not mean extensibility. A lot of times we think elasticity, we think, okay, you can stretch it. That's not what elasticity means. Elasticity does not mean you can stretch something. Elasticity means after you stretch it, it goes back. It goes back. Okay? Elasticity means after you stretch it, you go back. For example, rubber bands are elastic, not because you can stretch them, but because when you let them go, they return to their normal state, shape. In the next unit, we're going to talk about connective tissue. And we have connective tissue in our ears, and guess what it's called? Cartilage. What type of cartilage?
Elastic.
Elastic cartilage. Because when you move your ear and then let it go, it pops right back to normal. Elastic cartilage. Okay? So they have to have elasticity so that they want to go back to their normal resting position. All right. So that's pretty much the description of muscle tissue. Now let's get a little bit more macroscopic. Looking at the gross anatomy, this is actually everything here is just dealing with skeletal muscles. So looking at skeletal muscle, your gross anatomy, you have 3 layers that you need to understand. The covering around the entire muscle. When you see, and the thing about muscle that people don't realize is that you come into contact with muscle pretty much more than any other part of a mammalian body, or even a bird body, because you eat meat, and meat is muscle. And so you might not know what your bicep looks like, but you know what a chicken breast looks like, and you know what a steak looks like. And so that what you're looking at, when you're thinking about meat, is muscle. And so you know the coverings, you know the way that the fat kind of interweaves and separates it into sections. That's muscle, okay? So we're looking at this guy right here. The epimysium covers everything. The epimysium covers the entire bundle of muscle fibers. The paramysium is going to be each of these larger compartments. It's going to be paramysium. Paramysium is going to be the next level of compartments. It covers a bundle of fibers. And then when you get down to the individual muscle fibers, you have endomysium. Endomysium covers the individual bundle of fibers. Now, this is really important for skeletal muscle. And the reason this is really important for skeletal muscle is picking up a baby. What do I mean? You guys are both soccer players. You know what I mean. Why do you want to have your muscle fibers so compartmentalized? Why don't we just let the whole muscle work together?
So you can have control over what your muscle's doing, so it doesn't like.
Very good. Very good. When you pick up a baby, you don't want to pick up a baby with the same amount of strength as you would be maxing out your deadlift.
Right.
Okay, when you're maxing out your deadlift, you're going to give it everything. When you're picking up a baby, if you did the same thing, you would throw the baby through the roof. Okay, I said you guys were soccer players, all about touch. Okay, you're not going to kick the ball in the exact same way every time. You want to have that different touch. And if you think about the amount of touch and control that humans have with our muscles, if you stop and really think about it, it's pretty astounding. You know, the delicacy that we can use to pick up something that's very fragile versus the strength that we have when we want to really, really grip something. That's all due to this compartmentalization. So if you're wanting to be delicate, you might only fire a few of these bundles up. Whereas if you're maxing out, you send a message to all of them. And so that compartmentalization is very, very important. You're going to see this chart on the test. I'll be honest with you, I don't usually worry about labeling the blood vessel or the muscle fiber or the fascicle. Endomysium, epimysium, paramysium. Endomysium, epimysium, paramysium. You got to know those three. It's pretty.
Tendon and bone.
I mean, you'd be able to get that, but that's not what I'm worried about. And if you remember too, this is where your word origins come from. My is muscle, epi on the surface, peri in the middle, endo on the inside. Everybody cool? All right. So let's get a little bit microscopic. All right, so looking at the microscopic anatomy of muscle cells, these guys are long and skinny. So if you saw one muscle cell and you were able to isolate one muscle cell, we're talking about this long, skinny rectangle is a muscle cell, okay? One big thing that's different from just about any other cell in the body is that they actually have more than one nuclei. You got told in biology class that you have one nucleus and it's at the middle. When I showed you this model last week, I said, I don't think you have any cell in your body that looks like this, because cells in your body are going to be very, very diverse. Muscle cells look very different because they have to, because their job is to get shorter. And so instead of having one centralized nucleus, these guys have multiple nuclei on the periphery. So let's deal with the why there. Let's deal with multiple first. Why do you need more than one nucleus?
Because it's a longer cell.
Give me more. Very good.
I was gonna say for mitosis, you could like split or
Muscle cells
rapid
don't.
growth.
Muscle cells don't grow that much.
Okay.
Muscle cells, when you build your muscle, what you're doing is you're taking each muscle cell and making it bigger. You're not adding muscles. Okay, you're putting more fibers in the muscle. Okay, and so let's think about what nuclei do. Yeah, they split, but that's not the job they're doing here. Nuclei contain DNA, which is the instructions for making protein. Okay,
And muscles need protein.
muscles don't need protein. I mean, yeah, muscles are protein. Okay, the reason you eat a steak is not to get carbs. You eat a steak to get protein, because that's what muscle is. So we need to make a bunch of protein. We need instructions for making protein. The nucleus, you got to think about it like the blueprints. If you're building a skyscraper, you only want one copy of the blueprints on the middle floor. Where do you want your blueprints?
All over.
Everywhere you're working, all over the place. And that's kind of what a muscle cell's done. They put their blueprints all down the cell so that they can constantly be rebuilding and repairing this protein, because that's what the muscle is. Now let's deal with the second part. Why on the edges?
Because they need to expand.
You're getting there. What's the cell? So right now this guy's at rest. If I told him to contract, what would it do?
Which like that.
If my nuclei were stuck here in the middle, what would happen to them?
They don't get pushed in one spot and then they go back.
Sort of. They get squished. You want your nuclei on the edges so that when you get smaller, they can just slide along the sides instead of getting squished in the middle. So nuclei on the periphery so they don't get squished, and multiple ones so that you have lots of instructions for making the protein for what, because that's what these muscles are. Next up, you got a specialized plasma membrane. Instead of the normal plasma membrane, we talked about it in a normal cell, you have a sarcolemma. Sarco is another prefix that pretty much means muscle. Sarcolemma is the specialized plasma membrane of a muscle. You need a specialized plasma membrane because you're going to let certain things in that you wouldn't let in during a normal cell, and you're going to keep other things out that you wouldn't want out during normal cell. Okay, so sarcolemma is a specialized plasma membrane for nucleus. I really don't need to know much else about it. This is a specialized plasma membrane. Most of a muscle cell, the reason that this picture right here is bright red is that, number one, it's stained bright red. Anytime you see a microscope picture, if they had to stain it to look like that. Like if you looked at it in a microscope picture without a stain, it's just going to look like nothing. It's going to look clear. So they made a stain that looks like that. That's why your nuclei look a little purple and most of your fibers there look a little red. The myofibrils are most of your muscle cell. The protein filaments that contract about 80% of the cellular space. So when we did your biology, picture of what a cell is, you pointed to the empty space and you said cytoplasm. Where's the cytoplasm? It's full of protein. It's full of those myofibrils. Yeah, there's some space in there, but there's not much space. Muscle cells are pretty solid dudes. So that's why there's not much open space when you eat a steak. The striations, now you kind of got to squint to be able to see them in the picture here, but you can see them. They're all running like this. Those striations are those kind of look like dark pink, little stripes due to different thicknesses of fibers. So one of the things we're going to talk about is the sliding filament theory. So my elbows are the edges of what they call the sarcomere. And we'll talk about that more tomorrow. But where you see my hands and wrists crossing each other is going to be a thicker spot, so it'll be a darker red color. From my fist to my elbow is going to be a thinner spot, so you're going to get a lighter color. So that's what you see there with that striations. You have some spots, the darker red has the thicker spots, and the lighter pink has less fiber over it. If you saw this muscle contract, what you would see is all of these stripes get thinner because it would just do that. And you would get the lighter colored stripes would get thicker. You'd have more crossover. All right, so those fibers there, you have two different types. We'll talk about it more tomorrow too. You have the thick bundles of myosin and thin bundles of actin. The thick fibers are the ones that do the work. The thin bundles are pretty much, you can think about them like rope that get pulled. So the thick fibers pull on the thin fibers to make the entire muscle cell shorter. The muscle contraction is due to this sliding of the thick and thin filaments. The filaments slide by one another, brings the whole muscle cell together. Nice pretty picture there. You got the nuclei on the edge, striations, and then you have these guys got cut down the middle like a slice of bacon, whereas these guys got cut in half. That's why you see that they look different. All right, so looking at the metabolism of skeletal muscle, you would think that since these guys are doing a lot of work, they would have a whole lot of ATP ready to rock and roll. That's not the case because they don't have the space. There's no storage space for ATP that's not doing anything. And so there's very little stored ATP. With that being said, you need a whole lot of mitochondria because you always need to be ready to go. So you need abundant mitochondria to produce lots of ATP as long as you have oxygen. Now, what we're in luck, though, is that if you don't have oxygen, you're dead. No. If you don't have oxygen, you can still use your muscles. We're in luck because if we ran out of oxygen and just our muscles stopped, You'd be running from the bear. You run out of oxygen. I can't catch my breath, and you would fall out, and the bear would eat you. So it's an evolutionary trait that has allowed us to continue even when we can't catch up with our oxygen. There's a but though. This is called fermentation, and it's otherwise known as lactic acid fermentation, and it'll eventually produce lactic acidosis, and that makes your muscles burn. So when your muscles are burning, when you're running or when you're lifting something really, really heavy, that's your body saying,
Stop.
slow down so we can catch up and get some more oxygen. So you get this very interesting evolutionary feedback from your body. Now, what the physical therapist or trainer is telling you when he says feel the burn is, what does he want you to do?
Push yourself to the point where you basically have to stop.
Use the most efficiency that your body can, because once you're burning, that's telling you now we've used our maximum oxygen. And eventually, if you keep exercising your body, you'll hit that burn later and later and later. And so that's what that whole idea, that whole exercise theory of feeling the burn is about. It's all about pushing yourself to that max and trying to keep pushing yourself to that max. And your body's going to adapt to it because your body doesn't want to go to that max. You know, if you sit on the couch for all summer long and then show up at soccer practice, your body's not going to be ready for that. Your body's going to be burning pretty quick. If you wake up every morning and run a 5K, your body's ready for that. And so you have this, that's the idea behind that training there. But it's a really good adaptation that we have, because you can burn through it and you can push through it, because there might be a bear chasing you that you can't stop for. Real quick, looking at smooth muscle. I know I have A there, but there isn't a B, I don't think. Yeah, that's where we'll stop here. Yeah. So looking at smooth muscle. Smooth muscle, I'm not going to talk about as much just because it's not as fun. It's harder to really grasp what it looks like and what it is. But we're dealing with the digestive system or endocrine system, where it has to be, you know, pumping out stuff like that. These are much smaller cells. Instead of being long and skinny, they're spindle shaped. And I know it doesn't really look like that picture there, but if you think about it, you can kind of maybe see it if you squint. I think of it like a tessellation. Y'all talk about tessellations in math class? Talking about art. Well, I remember we used to do it in math class. I don't know. I think it might have been math teacher just trying to be fun. But the tessellation is where you have one shape on another shape on another shape on another shape. That's what this always reminds me of tessellations, where you have that one shape that just repeats piling on top of each other. And that's what I get out of smooth muscle. But smooth muscle, much smaller cells. They're spindle shaped, which just means skinny on the end and thick in the middle. And they have a single centralized nucleus. And I don't really say this in the notes, but the fibers for the skeletal muscle all run parallel to the size of the muscle. The fibers of this guy are going to go in all directions. Kind of looks like a starburst or an eye. The fibers go out in all directions, so that when this muscle contracts, the whole cell just gets smaller. The whole cell just squeezes in and gets smaller. And if you do that on top of a bunch of cells, the whole tissue just gets smaller. And usually this is a circular tissue, which means the whole tube gets smaller. Think of peristalsis, which is the movement usually provided by smooth muscle, as squeezing that tube of toothpaste. It's that circular squeezing motion that makes your digestive system work. Now, the thing about it is unlike skeletal muscle, you don't have the compartmentalization. So you can't say, let me move this piece of food from my caloric sphincter 2 inches forward down my duodenum. It just blobs around. You know, it's just what it does. It just blobs around. And we only have skeletal muscle at the beginning of our digestive system when we swallow and when we chew, and at the end of our digestive system, which is actually part smooth muscle and part skeletal muscle, because we do have some control over our defecation, thank God. But if you've ever waited too long, you realize pretty quickly you do not have 100% control over your defecation, which means that smooth muscle is there too, in addition to that skeletal muscle. There's also no striations. Everything is nice and smoothly colored. The white lines in there are space between the cells. They're not striations in the cells. Questions? All right, tomorrow we'll jump on some muscle physiology. Thank you, James, for joining us. I'm gonna post this video here in just a bit, and tomorrow we'll talk about some physiology. The big chunk of this test is the physiology essay. I'm pretty much gonna ask you to take me from the nerve signal reaching the muscle to a muscle moving and going back to rest, and all of the chemicals that have to transform to do that. So we're going to cover that tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a good day to join us if you don't usually join us live, just so you can ask any questions that you might be confused about, but be ready to rock and roll. Good job, guys. All right, James.
So long.
Farewell. Avida sing adieu.
Sayonara.
I do to you and you and you.